So, welcome everybody to another Montessori Lives, conversations with notable Montessorians. And this evening, and some non-Montessorians, this evening we are honored to have with us Carlotta Ehrenzelle. Did I say your name correctly?
Yeah, not bad.
Oh,
Ehrenzeller.
okay, good. And you are a Swiss education and peace building scholar, and I'll leave the rest to you to tell. You're currently in Bern, Switzerland. It is a reasonable hour, you told me, like 8 a.m.
Yeah, it's 8 a.m. here. Exactly.
So maybe if you can give a bit of an introduction about your Montessori story. Who are you? How did you come to be researching Montessori?
Yes, thank you so much, Mark, also for the invitation to have this conversation about Montessori. I finished my PhD about Montessori in 2023, so it's been a while now that I was deeply thinking about it, but it's been very nice to get my thesis back out and read back into it. I came to Montessori. I did my PhD in education, globalization, and international development in Cambridge, and I did the master thesis in Bangladesh in an alternative school that used Montessori approaches. Um, can you hear me okay?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. I think maybe someone was unmuted. Yeah, so the school used various aspects of Montessori, but obviously the teachers weren't trained as Montessorians. They were funded by the German Development Aid, and they used, for example, the 3-hour work blocks, the mixed age classrooms, the freedom focusing on the child. Which is for Bangladesh educational system was revolutionary because that's highly structured, highly punitive, also very hierarchized, very much rows in front of a teacher who tells you exactly which words to copy from the board. Um, they also did meditation at the end of every school day, which I know is not part of Montessori, but was their adaptation because it was also an interfaith school with Muslims and Christians. And it was really interesting to observe as a researcher there. I was focusing on teacher retention, but to observe what this kind of alternative education did to the children. So that's one part of the puzzle piece, this experience in rural Bangladesh. Students from the first generation also who learned how to read and write to work with alternative approaches in a Bangladeshi education system where Montessori was basically unheard of. And then the second part comes that then I thought, okay, there must be something about how these children react so different in the way that they are sure in themselves, in the way that they interacted with each other, with adults, with me. That was so interesting to me, and I wanted to go into peace building. And so I started working for the Swiss Foreign Ministry and went on a peace building mission to Sri Lanka. And that was a diplomatic mission. I worked at the embassy. It was very much politics focused, and I kind of went through this same thinking that Maria Montessori went, that I came to the conclusion and had to realize that politics and diplomacy won't solve the problems that we have. It was a lot about minorities. Sri Lanka was in a civil war until 2011. And I really thought through development aid, through diplomatic peace building, there could come some negotiations or there could be agreements found between the different parties. But it just got worse and worse to the moment that my office workmate got kidnapped and I was sent back to Switzerland. That was in 2019. And so I then got a post in Switzerland at the foreign ministry, but started to realize that I think for me, the answer must be hidden in education. It cannot, this politics was just like band-aid politics, but didn't get to the core. Like it didn't lead to prevent conflicts.
Mm.
If anything, some things could be stopped, but I didn't see any change of thinking in people. And that's how I came to decide that I would like to pursue a PhD to dive deeper into this topic and to find an education that tries to teach peace, which obviously the one educational approach that we have is Montessori education. And that's how during the pandemic in 2020 to 2023, I did my PhD at the University of Cambridge at the Faculty of Education in the Peace Building Research Center, researching Montessori education and how it can be reimagined to educate for peace today. That a bit about my background and then how I got into Montessori. So I did not go to Montessori school myself. I'm also not a Montessori educator, and that's important for me also to disclaim. I had a lot of conversations with my supervisor back then. Should I go through the training before I start the research so I can research from within? And we decided together that there might also be a healthy regard from the outside if I don't get mixed into this politics and associative wars and go there really as a researcher.
Mm.
About the research, so it was
What did
during
you
COVID.
find? Yeah, that was my next question.
Yeah, it was during COVID. So I had to reframe it a lot of times because I was really interested in the Éducateurs Sans Frontières, so
Mhm.
in the Montessori association from Mario, which is kind of the outreach association that is globally. So first I looked at the Corner of Hope project in Kenya, where again, these people have been internally displaced but have been living in these camps for decades now.
Mm.
I looked at an approach in northern Canada where it was really indigenous focused, which was extremely interesting to see how they managed to bring the indigenous cultures into Montessori. It was like communities that are still moving around. And India, because of course Maria Montessori was there a lot. But because of COVID, in the end, everything changed. And I went to Germany and Australia, which was also where I could get ethical approval to do the research. And it had to be schools that were safe, there had to be certain medical options available to me. And I was interested in not just researching about Montessori, but with Montessori. So to have the same kind of method of observing the child, preparing an environment, and engaging with the child. And that was a whole transformative process for me as well. How can I position myself as a researcher from within, but also from without, always balancing those two aspects? And so I spent half a year at a Montessori school in Germany that was public, but that decided to do mixed age approach, Montessori education, Montessori trained teachers. They blended it with the forest school approach and with an approach that's called Bindungspädagogik, so pedagogy of connection, basically. So really centered on the relationship between the adult and the student. It was also an integrative school, so children with Down syndrome, one child was deaf, differences on the spectrum of neurodivergence. Yeah, that was a German case. And the Australian case was a private Montessori school that went really from preschool up until the end of year 12. And I focused in both cases on 6 to 9 year old children, so Psycho 1.
Mm.
Um,
Which school was that in Australia?
I can't really say.
Oh,
It
okay.
was in one of the major cities. That's what I can share. And I mean, there's not that many schools, so I'm guessing people who read my work from Australia know what school I'm talking about. But yeah, it was in one of the major cities.
Okay. Oh, okay. So you can't say for privacy reasons.
Yeah, and just for data protection, because so I interviewed all the Psycho 1 teachers. I was with one particular Psycho 1 class for the entire time. I interviewed the principal, and it was a mix between ethnographic observations of spending time with the student, but then also one-on-one interviews and focus group discussions, where one main thing that I really tried to figure out from each perspective is, well, what does it even mean to educate for peace
Mm.
within a Montessori school in
Yes.
like today?
Let's explore that a bit. So, what did you find in terms of how Montessori, in what ways is Montessori a peace education pedagogy, and what does that mean? How does Montessori promote peace?
Yeah, can I share an image, or
Yes,
does that not work with sharing screen?
you should be able to.
Okay, let me see. Can you see this?
Yes.
Is it big enough?
Yep, that's good.
Okay. Um, I hope this is not too theoretical, but it's just an overview of the findings. So After reading Montessori's books and texts, I decided to divide it into three main pieces. So inner peace, interpersonal peace, and ecological peace. Inner peace meaning how does the child how is the child with themselves, basically. Interpersonal peace is the relationships, the community building, the teacher-student, but also student-student relationship. And ecological peace is also the engagement with the direct environment. Of course, the focus in Germany was very much on nature, but it just means the general engagement with the environment. And then I'm also happy to share the link to the thesis after if you don't have it already, because I explain it in detail. But there is one single peace framework that I have come across from Soni McFarland. And she came up with those four pieces. So self-awareness, community awareness, cultural awareness, and environmental awareness as kind of how can we measure if a child attains this peace. And the second row is then the synthesis from Montessori's writing. So how can we foster self-awareness in a child within Montessori? For example, through character education, chores, the creative engagement that there is, ceremonies, taking responsibilities, etc., etc. Or similarly, how can we foster environmental awareness? A lot of the cosmic education plan that Montessori has written about does focus on this. The gardening and planting a more concrete engagement with nature, botany, animals, real life engagement, etc. And then there are the empirical findings in both schools. So Malaya is the code name for the German school, and Kaplan Montessori is the code name for the Australian Montessori school. And maybe just to focus on the Australian one now, so the codes that came out are based on observation, interviews, and focus group discussions from the three groups, so teachers, principal, and students. And on inner peace, the three main themes that came out that foster inner peace is this child-centered learning, or this regard on the child and really working eye-to-eye level, fostering autonomy through choice, and feeling seen and heard for who you are. And I think it's also interesting when you dive deeper in the data, also what children expressed, how they feel seen and heard. Interpersonal level was really the importance of this class community, and to some extent, especially in the Australian school, a certain disconnect from the school culture. So we teach Montessori, but do we also live it and preach it? And how come within our little cosmos of we're 25, 27 children in a classroom, it's fine. But as soon as we go into break or recess, there are fights happening, there's shouting happening from teachers, there are teachers fighting with each other. What's happening there? Where's this disconnect? And developing strategies for conflict transformation. That was something that came out. And the ecological piece in Australia was the relationship with nature, which was extremely interesting because the Australian school I was with for the half year, they spent zero time in nature. They had a concrete playground. The children were dropped off in cars. I didn't experience anything besides in the classroom where they had animals in cages and plants in pots. But all the children mentioned the importance of being in nature, which was really interesting, and I'll come back to. And the second point in Australia was indigeneity and this disconnection to one's ancestor. I don't know if we have time at the end for discussion, but I would be really curious to hear how that has been in your experience. But the children that I was talking to felt a complete disconnect from indigenous communities. There was even racist comments during interviews. It was not talked about neither at home nor in school. And that was something that I really dove into. How can we teach for peace if we don't engage with the violences that have been committed in our own and on our own soil or in our own environment? I also looked at the statistics, and I think it's only 0.1% of Indigenous Australians that are in Montessori schools compared to 6% in public schools. And 91% of Montessori schools are in the major cities, which is obviously not where most of the Indigenous communities are, but there is a disconnect. And yeah, looking across both schools, and you see the themes are similar but not the same. I came out, or yeah, I developed these three cross-case themes, which are nurturing self-actualization, forming relationships, and recognizing the interconnectedness of all. And those are kind of the three main processes, but also goals that are in connection with the three levels of peace from Maria Montessori. So it was super complex, but this was the three main findings when we were looking across the schools. Sorry, I'm trying to end the screen sharing, which does not really work.
There should be a red button that says stop sharing.
Right.
Well, I do have a question.
Yes, please.
You know, when you chose the school from Germany, and
Yeah.
it was public school, and you mentioned that the Montessori school was a private school.
In Australia, yeah.
Yeah. So it could be that if it was a public school, there might have been a little bit of difference, but you've gleaned on the thing that I noticed too in Montessori, especially all the private schools, because in Montessori, a lot of them just Indigenous people just can't afford to go to.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
You know, so you're going to, it doesn't matter what school you went to in Australia, this is very much what you found was something that I've considered a long time. And the only way that your children can actually meet Indigenous children is if they are enrolled in a public school in Australia, most cases.
Yes. So are you saying it's more of a structural problem and an access problem?
Yes. Yes,
Yeah.
it is. It's an access problem. And so, you know, what you found was not necessarily what it's a thing that happens, but maybe if there was if there was a way to integrate Indigenous people into those systems, that would be a whole breakdown of those barriers that you've identified.
Yes, I agree, but I do also think that's the task of Montessori schools or the structures around it to make it accessible for everyone.
Yes.
Because if we have, I mean, I guess even from the general Australian population, in order to be able to afford those kind of schools, at least a private Montessori school, I researched, I know the fees, they were, for me, like insane high. But in Switzerland, it's also 95% of children go to public schools. We don't have this private public system in a way that Australia does. I think in Australia, it's about 30% that go to public schools, and it is actually the country within the OECD that has the most inequalities in
Yes.
its systems. So I do think that would be the task if we say we want to break barriers and we want to find a system where people come together to make it like to have ways that people from all social classes and minority groups can enter, if that's through stipends or scholarships or outreach programs or yeah. And the other way is, I think, even if you don't have Indigenous children in your classroom, you can have a way of interacting with your own histories and bringing that into the classroom and making it alive.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Because I think that there are schools who are, some private schools do it better than others. And I think you make the point in your paper too, Carlotta, that it's about those schools and those educators and leaders taking responsibility for that awareness and understanding what's happening in their world and somehow bringing that into the classroom. And I do wonder too, we've had in Australia big shifts that happened last year with the referendum, for instance, which brought lots of discussion into the public forum. Some was really awful, and other, it really clarified things for some people. And I think that it'd be interesting to see what has come since then as well.
Mm.
But it's and not just around Indigenous issues, all sorts of issues. I think it's important. if we're talking about peace. Yeah.
I feel like it shifted the discord around the aspect of education with Indigenous people, not just about.
Yeah, it did. It did, but I think change is really slow.
Yeah.
But I've noticed, I mean, and I can only speak for my local community, and I feel like things have really shifted. There's been a shake-up, and I think people are quite shocked about the outcome of that referendum. And yeah, and then others have stood firmer, probably, like anything happens, in those situations. But what I've observed in schools is there's sort of that tokenistic approach, which is the acknowledgement of country that a lot of children will say. There's the words that are spoken, but there's an understanding, a much greater understanding about culture that's seeped in. And I actually feel like public schools do it better because it's mandated, and they often have resourcing that links them to cultural advisors, and to cultural groups, whereas independent schools have got to source that in their own environments as well, and form those relationships, which can sometimes take years to establish authentic relationships. And then there's all the, anyway, I'll let you go, but because I also think about all those implications for curriculum as well that we have. Like, we've got these mandated things we have to approach, but they're not, they're still very superficially done, and yet there is a golden opportunity for us to look more broadly at how we do that now. Yeah, but it's slow. It's really slow, a slow process that's going to happen in Australia because it's so deep. The racism is so deep. Anyway, I'll be quiet and let you speak.
Yeah, but I think what you're saying about the tokenistic approaches is crucial, and that's also something that started also an informal conversation with parents, that it doesn't feel that the schools know how to engage with this on a deeper level that actually lets students, like, that's beyond theorizing about, but that lets students engage and feel. Yeah.
Carlotta, your mission has been to develop what you call a regenerative education, regenerative solutions to education that focus on social and ecological justice to address these crises that we have in modern society in terms of equity, climate, well-being. How does Montessori, in your research, qualify as a regenerative solution for education more broadly? And just maybe start by defining what is a regenerative solution.
Yeah, thank you, Mark, for that question. I think Montessori can, but does not necessarily automatically qualify as a regenerative education for peace. For me, what Montessori offers is the opportunity to educate within those three levels of peace. So to educate for the self, for the community, and for the environment. And that those are really the three crucial pillars that we have to educate towards a regenerative, more just future. And I have kind of three main points. What does that mean to educate for a regenerative future, or how can we do that? And the first one is really to restore and deepen relationships. Again, relationships with the self, with the other, and with nature. The second is self-actualizations for the basis for peace, and that is also directly from Maria Montessori's text. I think she calls it something like the naturalization of the child or something. So this engagement or becoming who you already are. And the third one is learning that heals rather than extracts. And I think that's also an important part of what do we want to let go and what do we need to hold on to as society, as teachers, as schools, what do we want to put forward for the next generation? I had this visualization of a flower, and if we look at a botanical book, that's kind of the guidebook or our Montessori education that we have. For this flower to flourish, we need to look at the actual conditions that the flower is in, the soil, the weather, the people that can pour water on it, what other flowers are around it. And I think for me, that often got forgotten in Montessori education, that we cannot just copy paste one approach and not take into consideration the socioeconomic background, for example, of the children, or the values of the parents in the community, the different ethnicities and religions that are also there, because that has to play a role. And I think regenerative does not just mean we take one approach and we say this is the best early childhood educational approach we have based on psychological or developmental psychology, but it means to adapt it specifically to the environment, so that the child can flourish and that the personality can really develop freely. So does Montessori offer these conditions? Yes. Does it happen all the time? No, definitely not. And also definitely in both schools that I was at, I think you could observe intentions, but also real life and the reality check that hits, right? Of all these troubles that children have today. I mean, social media is a huge problem. I think also the aspect that often families don't carry the Montessori values, and then the children live kind of parallel lives at school and at home. Climate crisis and fear of the future, that's becoming a more and more real topic that young people voice. How can we engage, and how can we work towards a more just world if the world's literally burning in the case of Australia, flooding in the case of Germany, but also engagement with the past historical things. I think also both contexts was very clear: Second World War, genocide in Germany, and indigeneity, racism, and the settlement history in Australia. Yet colonization and decolonization was not mentioned. The new Montessori handbook that came out in 2023, just before I finished the thesis, is 600 pages and has like 3 mentions of decolonizing Montessori education and including anti-racist education. And there's also a strong voice from North America, with African American Montessorians who try really to get to the roots and to move Montessori away from this educating towards whiteness and towards the normalization. And there's one type of child. But now I made a big tour to get to your answer, Mark, about what is regenerative and how can Montessori educate towards peace, but also sustain those practices of violence that the very approach is trying to work against, not because of malintention, but by not going to the root causes of the problems and just by telling the same story and recreating the narrative.
Yeah. So say a bit more about decoloniality, and how does Montessori educate towards whiteness? What does it need to do to change that, to be more inclusive?
Yeah, I think one thing that's always important when we talk about decoloniality is talking about histories and different versions of the past, and to not just come with one story, but to come with stories that connect, to show the plurality of perspectives, and to not just offer like I don't want to say the history from the perspective of the winners, let's say, but to really show the different strands that we are made of. Another point is, I think, to address local violences in whatever aspect that might be in the very community. For example, in the German school, as I said, it was an inclusive school. There was children with disabilities. There was also migrant children who barely spoke German when they arrived. And those topics were also not at all addressed. I think it's important that there were 6 to 9-year-old children, so I don't expect that there will be a political discourse about why Syrian refugees are now sitting in German classrooms. But there are ways to child-friendly talk about these issues and integrate those people and prevent the othering of people who are not the same. than the rest of us.
Mm. So what other peace education pedagogies are there, and how do they compare with Montessori?
There's so many peace pedagogies. I think one thing that's interesting is to look at positive peace versus negative peace. And what I love about Montessori is really the strong focus Montessori put on positive peace. So negative peace is the absence of war, the absence of violence, and positive peace is the presence of harmony, of justice, of finding a way to engage with each other. And Maria Montessori was one of the earliest people who really focused on this positive peace aspect and how can we bring this into the classroom. Another contemporary person that I found a lot of parallels with to Maria Montessori is Satish Kumar. I don't know if you know him. He's from India. And he wrote about soul, soil, society, and that those are the three biggest disconnections that we're facing in our story today, and that this is what has to be restored. So that's what I came back to also repeatedly. And I also looked again a lot at pedagogy of place. One of the big discussions at my PhD defense with the two experts was this question of, you looked how Montessori can educate towards peace, but how does the approach educate towards violence? And to me, as someone who observed also the beauty of this approach and what the way that it made children engage and flourish, I had to stand my ground very firmly during these 4 hours, and take that criticism and had to rework that into it afterwards. How does the approach also educate towards violence? And so critical pedagogy of place from Grünewald, he wrote in the 2000s, is very interesting to engage with it. And then the decolonial discourse, so to say. But that is a very theoretical lens to my thesis.
Well, say more about the criticisms from the people you were defending um, against there. What was their argument that Montessori educates towards violence?
I think it wasn't an argument that they made. I think it was a question to me. In what ways does Montessori also educate towards violence? And I think it circles back to what we talked about before. How are certain groups excluded? How are certain histories excluded? How are certain social justice topics not talked about? How can it be that within the approach, there are violences among teachers, as Mark, we talked about before we started the call? How can there be disruptions between different strands of Montessori? And also, why has the approach not managed to deliver what it promises, let's say, on a bigger scale, right? Because on an individual level, I do believe that a lot of children are transformed by this approach. Yeah.
Mm. Well, since you brought it up, Montessori has been around for well over a century now, and the world is still in flames, and Trump in the White House and violence everywhere. Australia's a bit of a bubble, but the rest of the world's not doing so well. Maybe Switzerland is, but there's a lot of troubles, and so how is it that Montessori hasn't made a difference in the world as Maria wanted it to? Her goal ultimately was not transfer of knowledge, content knowledge, but the transformation of society from within through education. Doesn't seem like we've really made much progress in that. So you know, I, I like to say that Montessori is really a failed movement. It's failed to take hold in the way that Maria wanted it to, or that she envisioned that it would, and failed to really make a difference in that. Would you agree with that? And if so, why do you think it's failed to take hold and transform society?
Yeah, I think it's super interesting and important question that I wish I had an answer to. I think I would say to your question that maybe Montessori education is a bit in an identity crisis. I don't know if I would say it's a complete failed movement, but I do see the point that it is going through a crisis. One of the problems, I think, is that changes have to be made on a local level. So we have to really zoom in and take responsibility as Montessori parents, as Montessori teachers, as Montessori school leaders, as Montessori general like association leaders. But it is also a structural problem. And how can we balance those structures that are embedded within a wider political context and in a culture that is moving extremely fast in a globalized world, while at the same time being able to implement the changes as the very person that we are with our realm of opportunities and responsibilities to make those changes happen. I think that is one huge problem. The second problem, just as a thought experiment, I mean, not all schools are Montessori, right? It's not that the majority of our world has gone through a Montessori education and been able to develop in this way. I think a majority of our children today, if we move away from just a westernized perspective, are still going through education systems that very much perpetuate violences, that perpetuate intergenerational trauma, that are abusive at times, that exclude women and girls, that don't teach the skills and the content and the pedagogy and the connection that Montessori was trying to do. I always wonder if access is a problem. At least in Switzerland, I know one of the big arguments why people wouldn't send their children to Montessori schools is because it's private, and that means you are very much surrounded by children from one social class only.
Is there any public Montessori in Switzerland?
Not in Switzerland. It's all private. And as I said before, the public schools have such a high standard. And it's, I think, deep in the DNA of Switzerland that like mixing social classes is happening in education and in the military. That's the two places where you are surrounded by people from different social classes. But then again, I mean, your question could also be, why aren't there more public Montessori schools, right? It doesn't have to be that this is such a privatized approach with such high barriers also for teachers to educate them to become Montessori teachers. Yeah.
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? Why have we Montessorians not been able to do a better job of making Montessori more widely available, of convincing other adults that Montessori is a better option for our children? I mean, Montessori said, and Mario too, that, love is the greatest force. Our love for our children is the greatest force of change. And so when we see our own children suffering, that makes us want to make changes, whereas otherwise we wouldn't. So why have we Montessorians, do you think, over the last century or more, not been able to convince more others with our example that this is a better system for their children?
I think Montessori did say it. She said, averting war is the work of politicians, establishing peace is the work of education. And I think that early in your career, when you were trying to look at politics to see what was going to happen, like if you could influence, and you came away and realized that it was not happening. So if the first part doesn't happen, then you can't really rely on the society to change, because the political climate affects the parents greatly. The political climate, when people haven't got food to eat or money to buy things or whatever, it's going to affect them. It doesn't matter whether they're black, white, or indigenous. And this is the world of politics, not the world of education. I think that in our world we can see it, in different countries we can see it, and it's a political system. It's not like in Australia and Switzerland, we haven't got any public Montessori schools. But in other countries where they do have public Montessori schools, they could be flooded with them. You know, they're quite a lot. So it's not through the people not wanting it. It's the politics of that area. You know, I don't know. I think that you actually experience this and know
Is there,
how
is
hard
there
it is.
something about the politics of the Montessori movement that hasn't been very effective worldwide in making change? I mean, I see it as partly our cosmic purpose as Montessorians, not just to provide high quality education environments for children, but also to treat each other in a way that allows us to more effectively transform society. So, I mean, you mentioned in your research you found Montessori adults arguing and screaming at each other, right? So, how is it that Montessorians can be trained in a peace pedagogy and yet be screaming at each other and treating each other in ways that Montessorians are notorious in treating each other in every country? It's not just Australia. You know, in the Netherlands, the Dutch Montessori Society just don't talk to the AMI, I'm told by a reliable source. And we have this similar situations in the United States where AMI and AMS tiptoe around each other, but don't really cooperate in any, meaningful way. It's the same in every country where Montessorians have this tendency to treat each other disrespectfully. What's going on there?
Is politics business?
Don't you think that uh, it's at a much more unit level that society has a problem? I mean, we can't change the political climate that we each have to live in. Yes, there's changes that can be made, but really, when I look at working with under three children, I just go, it really is a matter of changing the world one family at a time. I mean, one person, one individual making the choice to be kind, to be loving,
Mm.
to not speak about another Montessorian badly. I mean, we each have to make that personal choice to make a difference in our little sphere of influence.
Yeah.
And at one level, we are going to have to continue to, like, you know, I mean, every person in this room, makes the effort in their personal bubble, right? To be that person. But we are human. And
Mm.
unfortunately, our human condition is that we judge others. It's like part of our DNA to think people that are different from us
Mm.
are a problem.
Yeah. Let me ask Carlotta, what's your
What do
view?
you think?
Question?
I mean, I just go, let me change my little bubble, and hopefully that's just gonna.
Yeah. I think
Is
it
that
needs both.
too
It's
small
what
of
I
you?
said before with this balancing your own responsibility with what's the structure, and we also need to tackle that structure. I think one problem that Montessori has is that it cannot show its results. Like you cannot put love on a statistic. It's not something attractive to policymakers. I work as a political lobbyist right now for higher education policy in Switzerland. And so I'm a lot of times in parliament talking to parliamentarians about funding for public higher education. So nothing, no alternative education, nothing Montessori. And that is, we're being defunded by 4 billion. The Swiss education system in general is not even trying to put anything inventive or innovative or peace building. It's just, why should we fund education like this? It only profits a certain part of society. And I think at the moment, I can talk better about Switzerland than Australia, but the political climate that we're in is extremely profit driven. It's extremely capitalistic. Army and defense is being extremely upfunded. Like in Europe, of course, with Ukraine, Russia, and Israel, Palestine, um, all countries and the EU are like putting up that budget, and all other budgets are being defunded. And I think it's extremely difficult for Montessorians to put the positive effects that this approach has on the individual on an easy understandable statistic on a graph so that policymakers can understand and say, yes, let's fund this and let's make this a public thing so that more people can reach it. I don't think that's the fault of Montessori. I think this is sadly the current climate that we're in general, in a patriarchal capitalistic society that is focusing on economic profit.
Yep.
Not seeing that change in the near future.
And that is why, Fern, I like your comment about focusing also on what the individual can do, because I think that's why peace is on 3 levels and not just on one. We cannot neglect these levels. And within our realm, I think it is crucial to support the individual child, to foster this self-actualization, to foster connection, to recognize this interconnectedness with each other and with the environment if we want to make any move, like any path forward. I know it's not a satisfying
Let me
answer,
ask you
but
this way. How does Montessori need to change, or Montessorians need to change in order for this pedagogy to be a more effective regenerative solution?
I think it needs to teach also in peace. I think Montessori teaches for peace. It teaches the skills, conflict resolution, grace and courtesy, etc. It teaches about peace, it teaches the content, and it tries to teach through peace, through its pedagogy, but it doesn't teach in peace. And for me, teaching in peace is how do the teachers interact with each other when children are not listening? How do the parents talk to these children? How are the place-based dimensions and the context taken into consideration? And I think this fourth dimension of teaching in peace is greatly overlooked or just not considered. And that's what I try to share with this flower. We have to look at the soil that there is in order to be able to create conditions where peace can flourish. And if teachers yell at each other on the playground, they do not walk their talk. That is not teaching in peace. It becomes performative. And children are so smart, they can feel that.
Exactly.
I think you have no chance if, as an individual, you don't take that forward.
What do you think is the secret to the transformed adult? It's a big Montessori training that's really hard to nail down, right? Because transforming the adult was a big part of providing a child-centered environment for Dr. Montessori. But that involves adults looking at their own baggage,
Self-awareness,
mostly their own childhood trauma. But it's really hard to look at your own childhood trauma unless you want to. But being kind of told you have to, it's not going to happen. So what do you think in terms of Montessori training is how do we bridge that gap in Montessori in helping adults become more peaceful in themselves?
The first thing that comes to my mind from one of the data poems is to slow down. I don't think it's more input. I don't think it's more content. I don't think it's more training. I think it's we ourselves, us too. We need to also be connected with ourselves, connected with each other, and connected with the soil and with everything that is around it. And I think self-reflection and the opportunity to practice that alone and with each other is one huge part. I also, maybe to bring it back to my own experience as a PhD student within a peace research group, it wasn't peaceful. The relationship with the supervisor wasn't always peaceful. And also now in my day-to-day life, having gone through this theory and these processes, I try to meditate daily. I do yoga. I have exchange groups. I'm not always peaceful. We have conflicts at work that I don't handle well, and I know it. I think it's also human, and I don't think there's a secret recipe. I really think we have to, each and every one of us, take the time to be slower. And that's one kind of resistance. I think to be slow in a world that's turning faster and faster and faster.
That's
Yeah.
such a great answer. It was beautifully answered there, Carlotta. I mean, I think you're spot on when you say we slow down enough so that we can look at our own interactions. Because when we're rushing headlong through the day, it's really hard to look back and take account of what's happened and really examine, should I really have said it that way to my peer, to my colleague? And I think in many ways, Dr. Montessori didn't really slow down enough to look at her interactions as well. She was notoriously difficult to deal with and probably had a lot of her own trauma from a very difficult upbringing and adult life that she passed on to adults around her. So I love that answer that you gave about slowing down and looking carefully and reflecting. Um, you,
If you want to,
yeah,
sorry,
go
I
ahead.
just wanted to offer, if you want to, I'm happy to read one of the data poems
Was
to
just
you,
going to ask you that. Yes,
because I was going to read another one, but there is one that talks about slowing down. And if you want to, I'm happy to read it to you.
these. Yeah,
Okay, so maybe to just give you the background again, the one that I'm going to read now, it's just the teachers from the Australian school. And so I recorded the interviews and then transcribed them and then coded them in a coding program. It was a qualitative research. And all the words are words from the interviews. There are 0 of my own words. What my work was compiling them into this narrative. And it's about what the point of Montessori education is and why we're even doing this. And it takes about 3 minutes.
okay.
Okay. I haven't read it in a long time, but I also realized my findings are in graphs, but that's not how I'm gonna reach people. And so I wanted to humanize research by making people also feel something when they read my thesis and my work. And so at conferences, I sometimes just chose a short snippet of a data poem that I could share that hopefully people could relate with differently than me telling them codes or graphs. Okay, so the poem's called The Point of Education. You are already capable. You are already capable. 2 very distinct memories that changed my perception of education. 1. He was talking about the universe, that space thing. He was so passionate. 2. This boy telling me about archaeology, being an archaeologist, all the courses, uni, and then I was like, wow. Wow, this is so amazing. I had never ever seen any child like this, ever in my life. You see some really amazing things happening here. Helping the child see their place in the world, to be part of this bigger thing, that is really special. It's bigger than that. These children, they're so capable. We got that relationship, connection before correction. I feel I can say things, deal with things when things don't do that other people couldn't. We got that relationship. They know I like them. Self-absorbed young adults who think life will just be handed to them, too easy, like a survival of the fittest, will have a pandemic and they won't know what to do. Or a global financial crisis. Oh, what do I do? We all fall off our bicycles. We all fall off the monkey bars. It's not the end of the world. Lead them to the answer. Think for themselves. Do for themselves. Make wrong choices. Make mistakes. Repeat making wrong choices. Learn. Just be prepared to have a go and make the next choice differently. There is this whole global undermining of children, you know? We got child pornography, child slavery, children being sold on the black market. There's just there's this degradation of children. So many people don't acknowledge children as being wonderful little spirits. We need to give them the scaffolding. We need to give them time to develop into full-blown adults. We need to give them the support. We need to give them, we. Follow the child. Coming from a viewpoint that every child is different, that every child has unique interests, that every child is at its own stage of learning, at its own development. Don't just put the child into a box. Support the child where they are. It's like looking at the person rather than looking at the curriculum. Value differences. See the strength rather than wanting everyone to be the same for the sake of discipline. This unconditional positive regard. Value their uniqueness. At the bottom of it is this deep respect for the child. Have that respectfulness for children that they have for adults. People respect adults, but they feel like they got a right to yell and be rude or to hit or to bully children. The children live in a juxtaposition. 2 lives, one at home, one at school. Those parents, everything perfect, just right at home. Those parents wanting competition. They want their children to do exceedingly well. They push them into clubs and after-school activities, push them into sport, push them into music, push. We're putting adult expectations on the child, and that's just not right. Change the paradigm. There's a bridge to be built. The world that they all live in, it's such a busy, busy world, 21st century. And the greatest gift we can give the children right now, it's to be slow. It's to be slow in the classroom and to allow this process to happen.
Wow. Can you explain a bit about how the words were chosen for the poem? You said you coded it.
Yes, exactly. So I chose different codes that worked with one theme and then tried to intertwine the voices of the different teachers from the different interviews into one narrative based on the topic. And the interesting thing was to me that they tell a story together that separately they didn't tell. And it becomes a different pattern and a different richness. This one was just the teachers. In Germany, I did the teachers and the students. And the third poem is the students from both Germany and Australia mixed without the teachers. And that one is also very interesting because you see across the oceans that both groups of children, talking about the theme of peace in that case, have very similar cravings or needs of how they want to feel and experience peace in school and what it means to them. Besides the fact that, yes, there are 2 Montessori schools, but they were extremely different in the way that they had a day-to-day life with the children. And I also went back both to Australia and to Germany, to both schools, to present the poems to them. And I think it was also a way that I wanted to give back to the teachers and for them to feel very seen and heard, that their story arrived at me, but also that their colleagues who also shared in one-on-one interviews shared similar feelings. And yeah, it was also a way for me that I wanted to give back to the respective schools with my research, not just extract the knowledge and then disappear.
Beautiful. I love the way you did that. What gives you hope for the future?
I think children,
Mm.
I do believe that children have this purity and this curiosity of wanting to learn. And I think it's on us to provide the condition that they can thrive into those full-blown adults. And despite everything that both schools did not do, I do think there was so much intention from the adults to provide the best possible environments for these children. I always think we shouldn't let perfect be the enemy of good. I do think these schools really try and do their utmost best. I also want to look for myself, like how can I incorporate those learnings? And every now and then I stumble again across, for me, it really comes back to this soul soil society, myself connecting with others and seeing myself as part of a bigger picture, because that means that the table writing from is made from wood outside the window. The water I drink comes from the river. The computer has minerals from a mountain. It makes me see those connections and appreciate so much more the processes that go into it, and believing that if all of us try to look within ourselves and are open for these connections, we can slowly make a change. I don't know if there will ever be a peaceful world. I don't think that's the nature of us humans, sadly, since Neanderthalers. But I do think that we can contribute in our own ways of working towards a more just world.
Beautifully said, and probably a good place for us to end. But it's been such a rich and interesting conversation. I'm sure we could go on for hours, but thank you for your time, Carlotta.
You're very welcome, and I'm happy to put my email address in the chat if anyone wants to reach out or talk further. I can also share quickly the link to my thesis if you want to read more. And other than that, thank you also so much for everyone who shared their questions or impressions. I always love learning from other people, and for me, the people on the field working in Montessori schools and are engaged with Montessori, those are the people who shape what Montessori education today is. It's not us theorists. I'm just trying to observe and make sense of it, but it's all the people working with children and with schools who are making differences.
Well, thank you again, and thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll see you next time for Montessori Lives.
Thank you, Carlotta.
Thank you, Carlotta.
Very welcome.
Good
Bye.
to see
Thanks,
you again.
everyone.